A sailor fell overboard and splashed around trying to climb back up when an enormous wave hit the ship side on and almost turned it over.
The Little Mermaid swam into her grandmother's cave, perched herself on a large piece of orange coral, and rested her chin on her hands.
What about the man who had fallen
"Why
overboard?
so glum, Selima?" asked her grandmother.
Selima dived down.
"The current is strong and the winds run high. I thought you loved a good storm."
Off in the distance, tumbling over
"Yes, but I won't get to see it, so what's the point?"
Current.
"It won't be long now, young one.
But she
Be
knew she
patient,"
watch him
said
drown.
grandmother, smiling.
Without
"Your
another
time will
thought,
come.
she swam
Now,
towards
swim
him,
along. Your
grabbed
father will
hold
be
of his
wondering
jacket
where you are."
and pulled him up to the surface.
Selima loved everything about the upper
He
world.
seemed to be
The stories
breathing,
that she
but
heard
his
made it
eyes were
sound
closed
so
and he
exciting.
flopped heavily in
She
the
longed to
waves.
know what it was like up
Selima
there,
watched
what it meant
as
to
his
be
ship
human, to
disappeared
walk,
into the
to
distance.
run and to
She
dance.
looked around and
A tale
spied
was
a
pretty
cove
good,
where
but she
could
couldn't
push
help
him
thinking
onto
that
shore.
life would be 10 times
Once he
more
was on
fun
the sand,
with
she
legs.
drew back to the deep water.
Selima
to
hugged her
watch what
grandmother,
would happen
and as she
next.
swam away, she made a decision
It
to
seemed
do
like
it.
an age.
She would
until
take
he
a secret
finally
path to the
moved.
surface.
He coughed
It was against the
and
rules,
spluttered and
but no
turned
one
onto
would
his
know,
side
and she
before
simply
sitting up.
couldn't wait any
It was
longer
clear he
to
didn't
see
know
her
where
first
he was
storm.
or how he had got there. But Selima
As her
was
head
glad
broke the surface
that
of the
he was
water,
safe
her
at
eyes were as
last.
big as plates. She couldn't believe the deep blue colour of the sky and the angry clouds rolling above.
Said a voice behind her.
There in the distance,
Selima
the Little
turned in
Mermaid
the
could see
waves
a
to
large
see an
ship
old
being
mermaid
tossed
bobbing
around like a
there.
child's toy in the high winds and waves that were tall as mountains.
I had to save him.
A sailor
Had
fell
to
overboard and
or
splashed around
wanted
trying to
to.
climb back up when an
Selima didn't
enormous
know what
wave
to say.
hit the ship side on and
Don't
almost
worry,
turned it
I
over.
won't tell, said the
The
mermaid
ship
with a
then
wink.
turned into
I'm
the crest of
Lilith.
the wave
I know
and
how
sailed
you
away.
feel. I bet your family say you're
But
too
what
young.
about the man who had fallen
They do.
overboard?
Well, I am too young.
Selima
according to
dived
the
down and
mermaid
stared
rules.
into the murky deep. The sailor was
Stupid
far off in the
rules,
distance,
said Lilith.
tumbling over
I
and over,
know, said the
dragged
little
down by
mermaid
the
in
strong
agreement.
current. She
You're
didn't know what to
Selima,
do,
aren't you?
but she knew
I
she
know your
couldn't watch him
father.
drown.
The little
Without
mermaid
another
started
thought,
to
she
panic.
swam towards him,
Please,
grabbed hold
don't
of his
tell him.
jacket,
I
and
won't
pulled
do
him
it
up
again,
to
I
the surface.
promise. Lilith tilted her head
He
to one
seemed to
side
be
and gave a
breathing,
half
but his
smile.
eyes were closed and he flopped
Rule-breaking
heavily in the waves.
And lying.
Selima watched as
You're
his
a real
ship
rebel,
disappeared
aren't you,
into the
Selima?
distance. She
The
looked
Little
around
Mermaid was starting
and
to
spied
think
a
that this
cove
day
where she
was
could
going
push him
from
onto
bad
shore.
to worse.
Once he was on the sand, she drew
Don't
back to the deep
worry,
water
said Lilith.
to watch what
I
would
can
happen
keep a
next.
secret. So do you know
It seemed
much
like an
about
age
the upper
until he
world?
finally moved.
Selima
He
shook her
coughed
head.
and spluttered and turned onto his side
but I
before
wish
sitting
I
up.
did.
It was
Love
clear
it,
he didn't
said
know where
Lilith,
he was
smiling.
or how he had got
The
there,
sky,
but Selima
the
was glad that he was
mountains,
safe
the hills,
at last.
The people and those legs, said Lilith.
"Someone's
I
going
only
to be in
wish I
trouble
could go
when
up there
Daddy finds
myself."
out," said
I
a voice
know,
behind
me
her.
too.
Selima turned in the waves to see an old mermaid
said
bobbing
Lilith,
there.
tapping her bony fingers on her chin.
He was going to die. I had to
There
save
is a
him.
way, you know.
Had to
And it's pretty
or
tough, and you
wanted
probably
to.
wouldn't be allowed.
Selima didn't know what to say.
Wait.
"Don't worry,
You can
I
get me
won't
up
tell,"
there,
said the
with
mermaid
legs.
with a wink. "I'm Lilith. I know
said
how you
Lilith.
feel. I bet
But
your
there is a
family say you're
cost.
too young." "They
Oh,
do.
but I don't have any money.
Well, I am too
said
young
Selima,
according to the
her heart
mermaid
sinking.
rules.
Is there
"Stupid rules,"
anything else
said
that
Lilith.
I can give you?
"I know," said the little mermaid in
There is
agreement.
one thing.
"You're
said Lilith
Selima, aren't
quietly.
you? I know your
Anything,
father."
said Selima
The little mermaid
excitedly.
started to panic.
Well,
"Please,
in return
don't
for
tell
an
him. I
amazing
won't
life
do it
up
again, I
there,
promise."
All I need
Lilith
is
tilted her head to one side and gave a half
your
smile.
voice.
"Rule-breaking and
Selima
lying.
touched her throat.
You're a real rebel,
But
aren't
I'm
you,
quite
Selima?"
attached to it.
The little mermaid was
Lilith
starting to think
tutted
that this day
loudly.
was going from bad to
I
worse.
thought you were serious.
"Don't
I
worry,"
am,
said
honestly.
Lilith. "I can
It's
keep
just
a
that-
secret."
Won't
"So
I
do you know
need
much
it?
about the upper world?"
Silly girl.
Selima shook her
said
head.
Lilith. Do you
"No,
know nothing
but I
about
wish I did."
humans?
"Love it,"
Voices are
said
hardly
Lilith,
used
smiling.
up there.
"The
You won't
sky,
miss it.
the
Trust me."
mountains, the hills, the people,
The
and
old
those
mermaid
legs,"
then
said
produced a
Lilith.
large flat
"I
piece of
only
seaweed
wish I
covered
could
in
go up there
tiny
myself."
writing. Sign this
I know,
contract and
me
you can
too.
start your adventure right away.
Said Lilith,
Wait, what?
tapping her bony
Now?
fingers on her chin.
No time to lose. Said
There is a
Lilith
way,
happily.
you know.
I'm
I mean, it's
sure
pretty
they'll
tough,
love
and you
up
probably wouldn't be
there,
allowed.
That prince especially.
Wait,
Selima's eyes
you can get me
widened.
up there with legs.
Prince.
Yep.
Oh yes, he's
said
a
Lilith.
prince. Didn't you know?
But there is a cost.
Anyway, if he doesn't grow to
Oh,
love
but
you,
I don't have
then
any
you'll just
money,
come
said
back
Selima, her heart
to the
sinking.
ocean.
Is there
Lilith nodded.
anything else that I can give you?
We all end up in the ocean, no
There is
matter
one
what.
thing,
Now,
said
your
Lilith
signature
quietly.
here, please.
Anything, said Selima excitedly.
Shouldn't I
Well, in
read
return
it
for an
first?
amazing life
Asked
up there,
Selima nervously.
all I need is...
Don't you trust
your
me?
voice,
Said Lilith, looking quite upset.
Selima touched her throat.
Yes, of course I do,
But
said
I'm
Selima,
quite attached
worried
to
about
it.
being rude.
Lilith
she took the
tutted
pen
loudly.
and signed her name.
I thought you were serious.
Then everything
I am,
went
honestly.
black.
It's just that... Won't I need it?
Selima woke up
Silly
on the shore.
girl, said Lilith.
The sun was shining
Do you know nothing
brightly.
about humans?
She had no memory
Voices
of how she'd
are
come to be
hardly
there,
used up
and she
there.
was starting
You won't miss
to
it.
shiver.
Trust me.
She'd never felt
The old
cold
mermaid
before,
then produced a
and sat
large
up
flat
and
piece of
hugged herself
seaweed
to get
covered in
warm.
tiny writing.
Then
Sign
she
this
looked down
contract
and
and you
saw
can
that
start
instead
your
of her
adventure
tail,
right away.
she had
Wait, what?
legs.
Now? No time to
old mermaid
lose,
had
said
done
Lilith
it.
happily. I'm sure they'll love you up there,
don't
that
believe
prince
it,
especially.
thought Selima.
Selima's
Tried to
eyes
say,
widened.
Wow. But the
Prince.
sound caught in her
Oh,
throat.
yes, he's a prince.
Of
Didn't you know?
course.
Anyway,
She'd
if he
swapped her
doesn't grow
voice
to
for
love you,
these legs.
then you'll just come back.
She had a
To the
moment
ocean.
of sadness because
Lilith nodded.
in the ocean, Selima
We all
was
end up
known
in
for
the
her
ocean,
beautiful
no matter
singing
what.
voice.
Now, your
And
signature
now
here, please.
It was gone.
Shouldn't
Young
I
lady,
read it first?
Are you okay?
Asked Selima
Selima
nervously.
looked up and smiled to
Don't
see
you
the
trust
face
me?
of the
Said
prince
Lilith, looking
that
quite
she had
upset.
saved from
Oh,
the
yes,
ship
yes, of
and
course I
dragged to
do,
shore.
said Selima, worried about being
took off
rude.
his cloak
She took the
and
pen
wrapped it around
and
Selima.
signed her name.
Come,
Then everything
said kindly.
went black.
Let's get you warm. There are some
Selima
clothes up at
woke
the
up
castle.
on the shore.
You must
The
tell
sun
me
was
how you
shining
came to be
brightly.
here like this.
She had no memory of how she'd come to be there, and she was
The Little
starting
Mermaid
to shiver.
wanted to.
She'd
more
never
than
felt the
anything.
cold before
But
and
without a
sat up and
voice, how
hugged
could
herself
she?
to get warm.
As they
Then
walked
she
to the
looked down and
castle
saw that
along
instead
the
of her
sandy
tail,
track,
she
Selima
had
used simple
legs.
gestures to show
The
that
old
she was
mermaid had
unable
done
to
it.
speak, and the prince seemed to
I
understand.
don't believe it, thought Selima, and tried to
Weeks
say,
passed,
wow,
and Selima
but the sound
enjoyed
caught
the
in her
beauty of
throat.
the world
Of
she had
course,
watched from afar.
she'd swapped her voice
She
for
became
these
good
legs.
friends with the prince. And
She had a
all of the
moment of
courtiers.
sadness because
They took
in the
her on
ocean,
horseback
Selima was
rides
known
into
for
the
her beautiful
mountains
singing
and
voice.
through the lush green
And now
forests.
it was gone.
She was overjoyed at every single
Young lady,
sight and smell
are you
that
okay?
the upper world has to
Selima
offer.
looked up and smiled to see the face
Life was
of the
good,
prince
but
that
bad
she had
news
saved from the
came
ship
one
and dragged to
morning
shore.
when the Little
He took off
Mermaid
his
learned
cloak
that the
and wrapped it
prince
around Selima.
was due to be married to a
Come,
princess of
he
a
said
nearby
kindly.
land.
Let's get you warm.
She realized
There are
that
some clothes
perhaps
up
her
at the
dreams
castle.
of being with him were
You must tell
gone,
me how you
and
came
she
to
would
be
have
here
to
like
return
this.
to the sea.
The little
The
mermaid
thought
wanted
of leaving
to,
the upper world
more than
made
anything.
her very sad.
But
she
without a
told
voice,
herself
how
that
could
at
she?
least she had had
As
an
they walked to the
adventure that
castle
no
along the
other
sandy
mermaid
track,
had been
Selima
lucky
used
enough to
simple
know.
gestures to show that she was
In
unable
her
to speak,
sadness,
and the
Little
prince
Mermaid
seemed to
walked down to the
understand.
sea at night when the rest of the castle were asleep.
Weeks passed, and
She sat
Selima
on the
enjoyed the
sand
beauty
and
of the
felt the
world she had
soft,
watched from
salty
afar.
waters
She
breaking
became
on
good
her
friends with the
toes.
prince and all of the courtiers.
She
They
heard
took her on
splashing in the
horseback
waves
rides
beyond
into
the
the
rocks,
mountains and
was
through the
overjoyed
lush
to
green
see her
forests.
sisters
She was
bobbing in the
overjoyed
waves.
at every single
She could
sight
not
and
mistake
smell
their
that the
long,
upper world
flowing
has to
silver
offer.
hair in the water.
Life was
She
good,
could not say
but bad
hello,
news
of course, but
came one morning
Jemima and Amelia
when the Little
already
Mermaid
knew
learned that
why.
the prince
They
was
told
due to be
her
married
that they
to a
knew
princess
all
of a
about the
nearby
deal
land.
that she had made with
She
Lilith.
realized that perhaps her dreams of being with him
You
were
should have
gone,
come to
and
us
she would have to
first,
return to the
explained
sea.
her sister Amelia. No
The
one ever
thought of
did well
leaving the
from
upper
dealing
world
with
made her
Lilith.
very sad, but she told
Little
herself that at
Mermaid
least
nodded
she had
to
had an
show that she
adventure that
understood.
no other mermaid had been lucky
If the
enough
prince
to know.
doesn't marry you, then you will die.
In her
added
sadness,
Jemima.
the little mermaid walked down to the
Little
sea at
Mermaid
night
shook her
when the
head
rest of
and
the
frowned
castle
to
were
show that
asleep.
this wasn't true.
She sat on the sand and
gestured
felt
that
the
whatever
soft,
happened,
salty waters
she would return
breaking
to
on
the
her
sea.
toes.
She tricked you,
She heard
Selima,
splashing in
said
the waves
Amelia.
beyond the rocks
I swam into
and was
Lilith's
overjoyed to
cave
see
when she
her
wasn't
sisters
there,
bobbing
and I
in the
saw
waves.
contract.
She
It
could
said
not
that you
mistake
can
their
only
long,
return
flowing
to the
silver
sea
hair in the water.
when you are dead.
She could not
If
say
the prince
hello, of
marries
course,
someone
but
else, then at
Jemima and
sunrise the
Amelia
following
already knew
morning,
why.
you
They
will
told
return to
her
the foam
that they
and
knew
be
all
lost
about the
forever.
deal that she had made with Lilith.
Well, this was a complete
You
shock
should have
to
come to
Selima,
us first,
but she
explained her
believed
sister
sisters.
Amelia.
She
No
knew
one ever
that the
did well
prince's
from
wedding
dealing
was
with
set
Lilith.
for 1 week's time.
The little mermaid
and her
nodded
head
to show that
span
she
at the
understood.
thought that soon she might
If the prince doesn't marry you, then you will die, added Jemima.
Passed quickly, and
The Little Mermaid shook her head and frowned to show that this wasn't true. She gestured that whatever happened, she would return to the sea.
And instead choose her.
She tricked you, Salima, said Amelia. I swam into Lilith's cave when she wasn't there, and I saw the contract. It said that you can only return to the sea when you are dead. If the prince marries someone else, then at sunrise the following morning, you will return to the foam and be lost forever.
The bride and groom gave their vows.
Well, this was a complete shock to Salima, but she believed her sisters. She knew that the prince's wedding was set for 1 week's time, and her head span at the thought that soon she might die.
She wrapped her bedsheet around her.
The week passed quickly, and Salima tried to spend as much time with the prince as possible. She hoped that perhaps he would change his mind and instead choose her to be his bride. But on the day of the wedding, as the guests boarded the wedding boat and stowed away their bags, Salima began to realize that this might be her last day.
Floating in the water. She did not
the wedding
recognize them
took
at
place
first,
without a hitch.
but as she
The
looked
sun
closer,
shone
she
and the bride and
realized
groom
it was
gave
her
their
sisters,
vows. The
but their hair
guests
was
cried
completely
and the
gone.
party went on late
She
into the
beckoned them
night.
over to the bow of the
Finally,
ship.
once all the guests had
"Found a
gone to
way
bed,
save
Salima
you,"
lay
said
awake
Amelia,
in her
holding up a
cabin.
large knife with a coral handle.
She wrapped her
"We got
bedsheet
it from
around
the
her
sea witch,"
and walked
explained
out to the
Jemima.
deck.
"We gave her our
She
hair
watched
in
the
return."
midnight sky with its blanket
"Now
of
we don't have
stars
much
and the
time," said
grapefruit
Amelia, holding
moon
up the knife.
reflecting on the
"This can
surface of the
save your
dark
life."
water. In the morning,
Jemima took
her
a deep
life would be
breath
over.
and then said solemnly, "The
Then
prince must
Salima
die
saw
by this
two
blade."
bald heads floating in the water.
This was
She
all
did not
too
recognize
much.
them at first,
She
but
had
as
the
she looked
chance to
closer,
live,
she realized
but
it
it
was
would
her
be
sisters,
without
but
the
their hair was
prince.
completely gone. She beckoned them over to the bow of
Amelia
the ship.
handed her the blade.
"We found a
Selima
way to
took it
save
and
you,"
nodded.
said Amelia, holding
Her
up a
sisters
large knife with
turned
a
their
coral
tails
handle.
and disappeared.
"We got
beneath
it from the
foam.
sea witch," explained
It was
Jemima.
nearly dawn.
"We gave her our hair
Time
in
was running
return."
out, so she
"Now we
walked to
don't
the
have
royal
much time,"
cabin
said
where the
Amelia,
prince
holding
and
up the knife.
princess lay
"This can
sleeping.
save your life."
The little mermaid stood
Jemima
by
took
the
a deep
bed
breath
with a
and then
knife
said
in her
solemnly,
hand. Through the
"The
small
prince
circular
must
window,
die by
she could
this
see the
blade."
sky brightening.
This was all too much.
As she stood there
She had
in
the
the
chance
dim
to
light,
live,
Salima
but it would be
realized
without the
just
prince.
how much she cared for him. And in that
Amelia
instant,
handed her the
she
blade.
knew what she
Salima
had to
took
do.
it and nodded.
She ran out
Her
to the ship's
sisters
deck,
turned their
threw the
tails
blade into
and
the sea,
disappeared beneath the
and
foam.
dived into the water.
It was nearly dawn.
Knowing that
Time
her
was running
time
out,
was up,
so she
and
walked to the royal
sun's
cabin where the
first
prince
light
and
would return
princess
her
lay
to the
sleeping.
foam forever.
The little mermaid
Her
stood
sisters
by the
appeared
bed
beside
with a
her.
knife in her
They
hand.
could not believe
Through the
what
small
Salima had
circular
done,
window,
and
she
they
could see the
cried.
sky
The
brightening.
salty waters mixing with the
As she
waves
stood
and
there in
foam.
the dim light,
They
Salima
swam
realized
together, holding
just
each
how
other
much she
tightly
cared for him.
as the first
And in that
bright glimmer
instant,
of the sun
she knew what she had
broke
to
the
do.
horizon.
She ran out to the ship's deck, threw the blade into the sea, and
Rays of
dived
golden
into the
sun
water,
changed the night
knowing
to
that
day.
her time was up,
But instead
and
of
the sun's
disappearing into
first
the
light
foam,
would return
the
her to the
little
foam
mermaid and
forever.
her sisters watched as the
Her
sun
sisters
rose
appeared
higher
beside her.
and
They
higher
could not believe
into
what
the
Salima
sky.
had done, and they cried. The salty
Salima's
waters
legs began
mixing
to
with the
tingle.
waves
She
and
looked
foam.
down to see that her
They
beautiful
swam
tail
together,
was back.
holding each other tightly, as the
"What's
first
happening?"
bright
she
glimmer
cried
of
out,
sun
tears
broke
of
the
joy
horizon.
pouring down her face. Then noticed that her sisters'
Rays of
hair
golden sun
had
changed the
magically
night to
reappeared
day,
on their heads.
but instead of disappearing into the foam,
"Your voice,"
the little
said
mermaid
Amelia.
and her sisters watched as
"The
the
magic
sun
is
rose
wearing
higher
off,"
and
cried out
higher
Jemima
into the
as the
sky.
sisters jumped and splashed,
Salima's legs
hugging
began
each
to
other and
tingle.
laughing.
She looked down to see
"But
that her
why?"
beautiful tail was back.
"It's
"What's happening?"
simple,"
she
said
cried
a
out,
familiar voice
tears
from
of joy
behind them.
pouring down her face.
"Grandmother," they
Then
all cried
noticed
out
that her
together.
sisters' hair had magically reappeared on their heads.
"Salima," said their
"Your
grandmother
voice,"
in the
said
waves,
Amelia.
with a broad
"The
smile
magic
on
is
her
wearing
face.
off," cried out
"My little
Jemima as
one,
the sisters jumped and
you have
splashed,
shown love
hugging
and
each other and
compassion
laughing.
and chosen to
"But
put
why?"
others before yourself.
"It's
It has
simple,"
broken
said
the
a familiar
evil
voice
magic
from
of the
behind
sea
them.
witch.
"Grandmother," they all cried out together.
"But the contract," said Salima.
"Salima,"
Grandmother
said their
shook her
grandmother
head
in the
wisely.
waves, with a broad
No
smile on her
contract
face.
can contain the power of true love and sacrifice. Salima felt the foam and salt water on her skin. She was a mermaid once more, and looked to her family and smiled, her heart bursting with every passing moment. She turned in the water to watch the prince's ship as it sailed away towards the land. She imagined his face as he slept on the bed next to his princess. Salima felt sad and happy at the same time, happy for him and for his future, and also for her own, with her family beneath the waves. She smiled at her sisters, gave a large swish of her powerful tail, and they all disappeared beneath the waves. She couldn't wait to tell her father about her incredible adventure. And what an adventure it had been.